topic number 4 this week. This one is around the cricketing tweets of Ollie Robinson, the England cricketer bowler who's been called up this week. Oh, sorry, he was called up for the first test last week, and he's subsequently been banned from this test, which starts today, because of tweets that he made when he was 18 or 19, of a racist, homophobic nature. And the ECB, the English Cricket Board, decided to ban him for this test match as a punishment. We then had a response, which we'll come on to and talk about at the moment. But then subsequently we find out that actually from the England captain, Joe Root, that there's a number of other England's cricketers who have, shall we say, a shady background on social media in relation to the types of tweets that in their youth or in their early manhood that they published. So it's about, how do we respond to that? Do we ignore it, or do we have a very sharp punishment so that actually sends out a positive message to others that if you have any intention of playing for your national team or whoever, that you will be punished in the future? I mean, let's face it, at the moment, we're told that employers go through Facebook profiles and social media profiles to see whether individuals are fitting the criteria for a specific workplace. And if it's found that they have a dodgy past, they don't even get an opportunity for an interview. So you could argue that if we're going to be treating people in that respect for the workplace, we should be doing the same for sports personalities or celebrities, etc. I mean, what's your take?
Of course, yeah. I mean, I agree, Jason. Of course, we're living in a time when, abuse, particularly racist abuse, on social media has reached extraordinary levels. Black, Asian footballers, cricketers, sports people of all types, athletes, are suffering daily abuse after performances. Even their own fans, so-called supporters of their own teams, give them horrific racist abuse, to the extent that we recently saw a whole load of sports people, footballers and other types of sports people and organisations, clubs, coming off social media for a week or so in protest to say enough. We're not standing for this anymore. Action needs to be taken. We've discussed before. I mean, action needs to be taken between governments, the police, and the tech companies to tackle this. They need to be identifying perpetrators, arresting them, charging them, and getting them into prison, because it's just not acceptable in any decent society for this type of abuse to go on, whether it's racist, sexist, homophobic, or whatever.
What's your take, Tom, on Rio Ferdinand yesterday? He came out and he said that our main thrust isn't to go around looking all these people up. Our main thrust should be to focus on a really comprehensive re-education program.
Yeah.
What's your take on that?
Well, I agree and I disagree. I mean, the second thing I fully agree with. The answer to prejudice tends to always be education. The answer to most things, I believe, is about education, both of our children and ongoing education, cradle to grave education for including adults too. Throughout our lives, we should always be learning. Every day is a school day should be everyone's motto. And I think as a society we need to learn so much more about our history, our colonial past, how that's slavery and how all of that has affected life in society today for all of us, obviously particularly for people from black and minority ethnic backgrounds. So yes, totally agree that education is the way forward. But I also think that far more should be done to identify and prosecute perpetrators. And once people start going to prison, it's amazing how that abuse will stop, or there'll be a lot less of it once people are actually charged and go to prison. At the moment, people think they can just post appallingly racist abuse on social media completely with impunity. and it staggers me. I've regularly written on social media in response to things. In what society do you feel it's acceptable? Our forebearers fought against the evils of Nazism and fascism, the most violent, disgusting form of racism, essentially, Nazism. Our forebearers laid down their lives to fight against that. Modern day racists are spitting on their graves, in my opinion. It's disgusting. And, going back to the Ollie Robinson thing, the other thing that's that's really interesting about it is, and I think it's right that he's suspended while it's investigated, and I think there should be some sort of punishment for him. That he's suspended from playing for England for a short period of time. But one of the things that's very interesting is that there's a propensity for our media and our politicians to use age, to describe age, particularly the teenage age range, in different ways to elicit different types of response. So I recently saw an article where there was a violent attack, and the victim was 16 and the perpetrator was 17. And in this tabloid newspaper article, the 16-year-old victim was described as a 16-year-old boy, and the 17-year-old perpetrator was described as a 17-year-old man. That's very interesting. I mean, given the legal definition of adulthood is obviously the age of 18 plus. And Oliver Dowden, the Culture and Sports Secretary, in essentially kind of, along with Boris Johnson, somewhat excusing the behaviour of Ollie Robinson, said something, I'm paraphrasing, but said something along the lines of that he tweeted, or he posted those social media posts as a teenager, and now that teenager is a man. Well, we understand that the things Ollie Robinson posted, he was 18 and 19 years of age. So he was, by any legal definition, already a man. So for Oliver Dowden to say he posted them when he was a teenager and now that teenager is a man is rather dubious use of language and stretching the legal definition of adulthood, isn't it?
Well, it's not dubious, it's just factually absolutely wrong. Yeah. But again, I guess if you have a prime minister with a long history of racist narrative, both in the written and the spoken form, I suspect you're going to have ministers putting their heads above the parapet and coming up with ludicrous claims. Before we move on, just to finish off, and finishing off brilliantly, with Mark Rambrikash's response to this political decision to step in on this discussion. I think probably in the future we'll probably need to look at the prison system, because I guess one of the arguments against sending people to prison is that, one, we're all different, and I think for some people that, as they used to call it, short, sharp shock does have a really positive response, because it frightens them so much they never want to go near those institutions again. However, for other people, much, much less so. And it can, as some criminologists will argue, become a school of crime. In other words, they go in having been abusive on social media, and they come out being able to, steal a top of the range car in 30 seconds. So it's something that really needs to be looked at, and I think the individual personalities of those people involved. I mean, if you lack empathy and you lack caring because of your upbringing, then being sent to prison is probably not the best way forward. If you want to educate people and change people's behaviour. But I think that's a discussion. If we can just finish off though with Mark Rambrikash, I think nails probably the last 4 or 5 years, doesn't he, Tom? In his response.
Irony, isn't there, with our Prime Minister getting involved? I think it's unwelcome. He himself has used racist language against Muslim people, against black people. He was voted into power, I think, on a very divisive anti-immigrant Brexit campaign, and race hate went through the roof during that campaign. So I think he's trying to bear undue influence in this case. It's almost as if his influence on the ECB, he wants to get some sort of outcome that he thinks is right. I think there's a real irony. If I was Ollie Robinson, I'm not sure I would want Boris Johnson involved and trying to support him.
Right, let's.
And I think Mark Rampakash, ex-England cricketer for many years, batsman back in the 1980s, early 1990s, he nailed it.
Yeah,
if I was Ollie Robinson, I wouldn't want a known racist coming to my defence, because it hardly makes his case any